Most burnout isn't caused by low motivation, laziness, or lack of discipline. In fact, the people who burn out hardest are often the most capable, the most consistent, and the most self directed. They show up, they do the work, they handle responsibility, and they don't need external pressure to perform, which is why burnout feels confusing when it shows up. Because on the surface, nothing looks broken. What's actually happening has less to do with effort and more to do with structure. Burnout is often caused by how identity load is designed. Most people unknowingly build their lives around a single pillar, one role, one domain, one primary source of competence and validation. It might be work, it might be productivity, it might be physical capability, or it might be being reliable, being useful, or being the person who holds things together. What matters isn't which pillar it is, what matters is how much weight it carries. Over time, the pillar starts carrying more than function. It carries meaning, worth, and identity. As long as it holds, life feels stable and you feel oriented. You know exactly where you stand, but structurally, it's fragile. Pillars break, but pyramids endure. A pillar concentrates force. All pressure flows through one channel with no redundancy and no load sharing. So when pressure increases or circumstances change, the system doesn't adapt, it fails. This is why highly disciplined people often break the hardest. So here's what that looks like in real life. Someone builds a life around being competent and dependable. They're the person who gets things done, who doesn't miss deadlines. They don't need help and they figure things out. That role starts as something they do very well. Then it becomes something others rely on, and eventually it becomes how they understand themselves. They don't consciously decide this. There's no moment where they say, I'm going to base my identity on this. It just works. And because it works, it keeps getting reinforced. Then something changes. The workload increases, the environment tightens, their body stops recovering the way it used to, or a constraint appears that discipline can't simply override. Nothing dramatic happens all at once. There's no single failure. There's no collapse you could really point to, but the margin disappears. They start feeling tense even on the days that should be manageable. Rest feels uncomfortable, not because they don't value it, but because it removes the one thing that confirms they're still okay. Performance dips slightly, and instead of seeing it as information, it feels threatening. At that point, the problem isn't fatigue, it's that the entire structure is asking one role to keep everything standing. This pattern shows up in different places. In people whose identity is built around being needed, saying no doesn't just feel inconvenient, it feels destabilizing. In people whose identity is built around physical capability, injury doesn't just limit movement, it collapses certainty. In people whose identity is built around being sharp or effective, even a temporary slowdown can feel like a loss. The surface story changes, but the underlying structure doesn't. One pillar, all the load. This is how that shows up psychologically. Healthy behaviors start doing the wrong job. Work stops being something you do and becomes something you are. Training stops being restorative and becomes identity protection. And rest stops being neutral and starts to feel threatening. You're not just working, you're defending your sense of self. You're not just training, you're proving continuity. And you're not avoiding rest because you lack discipline. You're avoiding it because stillness exposes how narrow the structure has become. From the outside, this looks like commitment. It looks like drive and it looks like grit. It may even look like someone who cares deeply and takes responsibility seriously. Internally, though, it creates constant low-grade stress because the system knows something the person may not consciously articulate. If this pillar fails, everything fails. That's why injury can feel catastrophic and why a dip in performance feels personal. That's why burnout doesn't register as tiredness, but as a loss of coherence. People often respond to this by trying harder. They tighten routines, they double down, they apply more discipline to a problem that isn't caused by a lack of it, which makes sense because discipline has worked before. But this isn't a motivational problem, it's an architectural one. Now, here's the solution. The alternative structure isn't less ambition, it's better architecture. A pyramid distributes load. Weight is spread across multiple surfaces, so no single failure causes collapse. Stress is absorbed, forces are shared, and the structure adapts. Psychologically, that means identity diversification. Meaning isn't centralized, competence exists in more than one lane, and worth isn't conditional on performance in a single domain. Now, this is where people often mishear the idea. Identity diversification does not mean doing more things. It doesn't mean adding hobbies just to stay busy. And it doesn't mean lowering standards or disengaging from what matters. It means no single role is responsible for holding up your entire sense of self. Work can matter deeply without being existential. Training can be important without being protective. Contribution can be meaningful without being the only proof that you're okay. On some days, work carries more weight. On other days, relationships do. Or maybe it's learning or contribution or your recovery. When structure changes, outcomes change. Identity becomes a limitation rather than an identity crisis. Burnout becomes a signal rather than a personal failure. Rest becomes functional rather than threatening. Change becomes possible. And because the nervous system responds to perceived safety and redundancy, the body follows. Baseline tension decreases, sleep stabilizes, recovery improves. Not because effort increased, but because load was redistributed. Most people don't need more motivation. They already have plenty. What they need is a different design. Not to remove the pillar, but to stop asking it to hold an entire life. Resilience isn't about being unbreakable. It's about not placing everything on one point of failure. This is uncommonly remarkable. Thanks for listening.